is it possible our leaders can hammer out a deal by tonight to pay the country's bills on time? Our team sources say maybe tomorrow, although they don't really know, in what is a new glimmer of optimism. What passes for that anyway here in Washington? Thing is, we don't have to wait for the deadline to see how bad no deal could be for you and your money. We've got the reality check and the vibe check in a minute. Plus, the longest sentence yet related to the January 6th insurrection. Why the head of the Oath Keepers says he's a political prisoner, and the tough words from the judge in response. And should kid influencers have to get paid for what they post online or for what their parents post? Lawmakers in at least one state think definitely yes. The new protection to make sure those mini social media moguls get a cut. Then how scientists are using AI to fight off one of the world's deadliest superbugs, the game-changing breakthrough. And the other side of AI in tonight's original, why are big tech, tons of hackers, and the White House now teaming up? We'll explain later in the show. Hey there, I'm Hallie, and there is the faintest, barest, sheerest glimmer of a glow of hope tonight that maybe we won't crash into a financial brick wall after all, with one Republican aide telling NBC News they may be close to a deal to make sure the U.S. pays its bills on time. With President Biden tonight echoing that slightly more optimistic position. Listen.
Speaker McCarthy and I have had several productive conversations, and our staffs continue to meet as we speak, as a matter of fact, and they're making progress. I've made clear time and again defaulting on our national debt is not an option.
Thing is, the people who actually have to vote on any agreement to get us out of the woods, they are heading home for Memorial Day weekend. So even if there is a deal, right, even if that were to happen, it'll take a minute before the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. And here's the thing. We don't even have to wait until that deadline day, about a week or so away, because every day that D.C. drags its feet, the risk of problems sooner rather than later goes up. We're already seeing some of it with one big credit ratings agency slapping a warning on the U.S. credit. It's not a downgrade yet, but it's a signal that a downgrade could come at some point. And if you're like, okay, well, I know credit ratings, they go up, they go down, whatever, maybe for you and me, but not for the United States. Our economy is the foundation for the rest of the world. We have a sterling, highest possible AAA rating. And if that gets downgraded, BFD. Look what happened the last time one of these agencies downgraded the U.S. credit. 2011, when the S&P 500 tanked 17% in less than 3 weeks. That is billions of dollars just evaporating from the economy. And even though Wall Street's keeping its powder dry for now, they're keeping calm and carrying on. Every day this goes on makes that a little harder for the markets. I'm joined now by our team covering this. NBC's Garrett Hake on Capitol Hill, and CNBC's Leslie Picker is joining us as well. Garrett, let me start with you, because in the last couple hours, there have been these noises, at least, not we are stuck noises, but maybe we're making progress noises, right? Should we be listening?
Look, Hallie, this has kind of devolved into a bit of a choose-your-own-adventure at this point. Just since we've been coming on the air, one of the negotiators themselves stepped out of Kevin McCarthy's office with this update saying we still have serious issues to work through that will take some time. We're in a moment right now that seems like it's one step forward, two steps back, and that's not terribly surprising with these negotiations. There's a lot of give and take that has to happen. All the pieces have to fit together into something that, frankly, a significant number of members in both parties are going to hate. That's the end goal that they are diligently working towards here. So, well, I think we're certainly closer today than we were yesterday. Whether we're close enough to avoid crashing into a June 1st deadline, whether that means default or not, is a different question. And right now, both parties' flanks, their leaders in Congress are trying to kind of hold up their end of the bargain. I talked to Hakeem Jeffries earlier today, and I pressed him on this idea of, whether he'd be willing to accept a bill that he's not going to like that's going to come out of these negotiations. And here's what he told me.
President Biden is continuing to hold the line as it relates to the types of devastating cuts that Republicans are trying to jam down the throats of the American people. It is unfortunate that House Republicans have chosen to get out of town before sundown when we are facing a dangerous default.
The reality is, Hallie, Democrats hate the outlines of this bill that's coming together here, but they know many of them are going to have to vote for it to prevent default. Now, the idea of people going out of town here is interesting because I've heard sort of floated this idea, given the politics of this, it probably makes sense to wait till all the members are gone before a deal that a whole lot of people aren't going to like gets announced.
That's funny.
That'll help kind of keep the lid on the complaints you might hear from the far left and the far right.
Although there are certainly plenty of ways to get those complaints out. I think what's interesting about what's playing out live on the air in just the last 5 minutes, Garrett, as we're talking about one aide saying they're close to a deal, the president's optimism, your latest reporting in the last 2 minutes that, hey, there are still serious issues, which doesn't necessarily sound awesome. There is still a lot that has to get hammered out. And even once it does get hammered out, there are then multiple steps that have to happen. As you point out, it's got to clear the House. It's got to clear the Senate. And already Mike Lee, of course, Republican senator, is saying he's going to use every procedural tool at his disposal to slow things down if he's not happy. Is that a Mike Lee thing, or is this the potential for like a bigger problem beyond that if this does get through the Senate?
Look, I think it's something to keep an eye on. I think the reality is a bill that's going to pass the House is going to need significant support from both parties in the first place, which means it's going to be set up to pass the Senate too. But this is the prerogative that any senator has, right? Any one senator can slow the process down dramatically. So what I see in a tweet from Mike Lee is more of a message to the House Republican negotiators. Stay strong. Make sure this is something all of us can support, or else. Now, whether Lee or any other one single senator wants to be responsible for tipping an agreement that would have at that point already passed the House, for tipping an agreement over and causing us to stumble into default, I doubt. But it's an important kind of message in what could be the closing hours of this negotiation.
So, Garrett, 5:06 Eastern time, standing there in the Capitol in Washington, how do you, in one sentence, frame where we are, if you had to do it on the spot?
Not close enough right now. They've got to get something done. There needs to be a deal probably by the time people finish breakfast tomorrow morning to avoid really getting close to disaster on June 1st. I don't know if they get there or not.
3 sentences, but I'll allow it because it was crisp and clear. Garrett, thank you very much. I want to go to CNBC's Leslie Picker now. So, Leslie, we talked about this whole credit rating issue, right? And I want to be clear because, like, I think about my credit score. I'm sure people think about theirs. You're like, yeah, it goes up, it goes down, whatever. It's very different for a global economic power like the U.S. When our credit rating goes down, like it did in 2011, how many years? It still hasn't gone back up. It's still been at that AA+ rating, not that AAA rating, right? Like, it's a big deal. And if it happens, it sends shockwaves through the global economy. That's why this new warning matters.
It's a tremendous deal, Hallie. You're absolutely right. The head of JP Morgan Asset Management speaking today basically said she doesn't care what goes on, kind of behind the scenes in Washington. All that matters to her, and she oversees trillions of dollars in assets, is what the credit rating agencies do. Essentially, what they're doing is they're giving a report card to different borrowers. And the U.S. historically has been at the top of its class. It's received the best possible rating because the health of the U.S. government is seen as top-notch. They will pay back their debts. They will pay back the principal. Well, back in 2011, as you mentioned, that all changed when the S&P downgraded the U.S. It still has a pretty good rating, AA+, but it's not the top. And the warning from Fitch basically said, if Washington doesn't get things together, if they don't come up with some kind of agreement, if they don't raise the debt ceiling, then they too could be looking at a downgrade. And this really matters because it signals to the market that the U.S. debt, treasuries, which underpin so much of the way our economy functions, are riskier. What that does, it sends up higher yields because borrowers have to compensate lenders in the form of higher yields in order to take on riskier debt. So that has ripple effects. It usually causes a sell-off in equities. It makes borrowing more expensive across the rest of the economy. And, we've seen it in 2011. Things are different now. The state of the economy is different now. So it's kind of uncertain what actually would transpire from something like that.
I just also think it's so important, Leslie, like we talk a lot about this, quote unquote, as early as June 1st date, right? That's kind of the day that people have circled on their calendars. Maybe there's like a little tail on that date, right? But the bottom line is we don't have to get close to that to have problems here. Even flirting with that date creates economic consequences. And that's part of what we're seeing now.
Flirting with that date has economic consequences. We already saw Treasury yields rise well before they rose, leading into what happened in 2011. And we actually spoke with the person who worked at S&P in 2011, who was kind of tasked with the idea of downgrading the U.S. debt. And they did so at the time after an agreement was signed. It wasn't like we defaulted on our debt and they downgraded us. They did so after the agreement was signed because they looked at the agreement itself and they said, this is making us riskier. And so therefore, that was the decision making. So even if we get a deal, it doesn't mean we're out of the woods.
Leslie Picker from CNBC, thank you very much. Tonight, lawyers for the Oath Keeper's head says his words were weaponized by the Department of Justice after Stewart Rhodes got handed the longest prison sentence yet for any defendant related to January 6th. Here are those attorneys outside courthouse after the sentence. Listen.
I think that essentially they have used Stewart Rhodes' words against him, but it was his words.
A judge pushed back on that. You're going to hear more about that in a second. After Rhodes was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. It's a big win for the Justice Department. Their investigation has led to seditious conspiracy convictions against leaders of two far-right extremist groups who they say came to D.C. ready to fight to keep former President Trump in power. On top of that, on top of these two, there's also a second Oath Keeper, Kelly Meggs, who was sentenced to 12 years in prison, also convicted of seditious conspiracy, same trial as Stewart Rhodes. I want to bring in Ryan Riley joining us now. Rhodes gave this kind of fiery, politically charged speech right before the sentence came down today, trying to make himself out as like a victim here, as a martyr, as a victim of political persecution here. The judge didn't like that.
Not at all. And in fact, that Ed Tarpley, who you just had displayed there, the lawyer for Stewart Rhodes, one of the lawyers for Stewart Rhodes, was actually someone who Rhodes tried to insert at the very last minute here. So he's sort of getting the message across that Stewart Rhodes really wants to get across here. You know, he had some conflicts with his other lawyers who I think went about this in a much different way than Ed Tarpley was here. So, you know, he was essentially trying to get home this message that he's a political prisoner, that this is all political. But I mean, that's just not what the jury found and not what the evidence shows and not what the verdict that was reached showed. And, you know, Stewart Rhodes was someone who was preparing for violence and was making these speeches ahead of time. And they had that whole cache of weapons that were stored in Virginia and was using this violent rhetoric, talking about this being the last minute, January 6th being the last moment where they could insert themselves and, you know, stop America in their view from being taken away. And that's sort of what he went with on his sentencing day here. He wanted to get home this political message, even though, you know, he's going to be spending a very significant amount of time in federal prison. He wanted to get this message out to his followers and say, you know, listen, I hope that Donald Trump comes back, because that's what a lot of these January 6th defendants are hoping for, is that Donald Trump does come back and pardons many, if not all of them, as he's expressed that he will previously, because he thinks that the January 6th defendants are being treated unfairly.
Ryan Riley, thank you very much for that update. Some new reporting tonight is raising serious questions about whether Donald Trump obstructed justice, with the Washington Post reporting that some investigators are suspicious about the timing of when Mr. Trump's team handled boxes of sensitive documents after he left the White House. People familiar with what happened tell the Post that former President Trump's staffers apparently moved those boxes one day before FBI agents searched his Mar-a-Lago home last summer. The Post also says the former president and his aides also allegedly did what's been described as a dress rehearsal for moving this stuff, even before Mr. Trump was subpoenaed for the classified materials. Vaughn Hilliard is joining us now. Talk us through some of these new details that the Post is reporting, the response you're hearing from the Trump team, who I think is responding tonight, and how it plays into this special counsel investigation about whether or not Donald Trump mishandled classified documents.
Right. There's an important nugget in the Washington Post's reporting, which, again, NBC has not confirmed the details that are included in this Washington Post report here. Yet, as you said, the Trump team is responding to it. And that important nugget was the assertion that prosecutors, special counsel prosecutors, have evidence that there were some of these classified documents, some of these sensitive documents that were at one point on the desk of the former president at Mar-a-Lago and were able to be seen by visitors, and that Donald Trump himself potentially showed some visitors some of these documents. That really hits at the heart of the not only the willful retention of such documents, but also the dissemination potentially of them here. Now, the Trump team has pushed back here this afternoon, saying, quote, in the course of negotiations over the return of documents, President Trump told the lead DOJ official, anything you need from us, just let us know. Now, the heart of the issue with that is that on June 3rd, a counsel for Donald Trump signed off to a DOJ prosecutor and FBI agents that all the documents they were seeking had been turned over. Of course, 2 months later, Hallie, in August of last year, is when the FBI went and executed a search warrant, and they ended up retrieving more than 100 classified documents, which clearly runs counter to what the counsel had signed off on just 2 months earlier.
Vaughn Hilliard, and of course, big reason why this matters is this question of will the former president face any charges, including perhaps obstruction of justice? We don't know. TBD. Thanks, Vaughn.
Thanks.
Let's go to the other side of the GOP coin, if you will, with Florida Republican Governor Ron DeSantis. He is doing some damage control in his first full day today as an official candidate for president. You know, his rollout didn't go as planned. If you watched our show last night, you definitely know that. But today, the governor spent the day blitzing the more traditional media, not on Twitter Spaces, but instead on more than a dozen TV and radio shows, on podcasts. In one interview, going after the former president's response to the pandemic, accusing him of having destroyed millions of lives. In another, not ruling out pardoning January 6 defendants. Next week, he's set to hit the road, kicking off what he describes as his Great American Comeback Tour in Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina. You're going to be hearing about those states so much in the next 75 weeks. Dasha Burns is joining us now. And DeSantis is making some news today, right? The news, I think 24 hours ago, as you know, because we were in it like live together, was, boy, this Twitter Spaces rollout was a fumble. It was just messy, didn't go off as planned. Today, he's getting out there. He is doing a full court press here, blanketing various airwaves, and talking about what he would do as president, taking on Donald Trump.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And sharpening his attacks in a much more direct way than he has in the past. Look, the last few months that he's been on the campaign trail, he's been taking these subtle jabs without directly invoking Trump's name. But today, the headline from his multiple interviews is that he actually is criticizing Trump much more directly on Trump's COVID response in particular, saying that he ruined thousands of lives by handing the country over to Fauci, really going after him much more directly and saying that he has moved to the left. This is the kind of language, this is a kind of attack line that we haven't yet heard from DeSantis when it comes to his top rival. It'll be interesting to see how he handles that when he's on the campaign trail next week, when he's talking to voters. This is where he starts to thread kind of a tough needle here, Hallie, because there are a lot of voters out there who like both Trump and DeSantis. Voters for whom Trump might be the number one, DeSantis the number two, and vice versa. And that's where it gets tricky for him. That's why, earlier our reporting had talked about how he's going to have to walk a fine line there. So once he's actually in front of voters on the ground, we'll see how he handles that there, Hallie.
You know, we are going to talk a lot, just because that is the dynamic in this race, about the Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis back and forth here, right? Whether, as you say, DeSantis is sharpening his attack against Donald Trump, as he is doing so today. Donald Trump has already had sharp attacks against Ron DeSantis. These two Florida men kind of battling it out for endorsements, et cetera. And it is, for now, a somewhat lopsided battle because Donald Trump remains ahead in the polls and remains ahead in those endorsements.
Yeah, and he has been absolutely hammering DeSantis over the last 24 hours. He, his team, his super PAC. You know, when I reached out yesterday to ask for a response from some senior members of Team Trump, one of them responded simply with a glass of white wine at a bar in Palm Beach. They are memifying this. So it's a little bit of a Rorschach test. Look, if you talk to Team DeSantis, they're saying that he broke the internet. But if you talk to Team Trump, they're saying it's a disaster. They're really using this opportunity to go after him. And they are very direct. DeSantis has been subtle, sharper now, but they have been hammering him. Now that he's officially in, I expect that that hammer is only going to get heavier.
Dasha Burns, live for us there in Florida. Dasha, thank you. Let's take it to Mississippi now, where tonight we're learning an 11-year-old boy is out of the hospital after he was shot in the chest by a police officer. The boy apparently called 911 for help because of domestic issues at his family's home, according to his mom. You see him here. Police showed up with their guns drawn and shot her son, she says, when he turned a corner. Listen to his mother at a protest outside the police department today.
He asked me in the hospital, like, why they shot him. He was in good spirit, but every now and then I look over at him and he'll just cry, and he asked me that.
The family is now calling for the officer to be fired and charged. Our local affiliate reports the family's attorney plans to file a federal lawsuit next week. The Mississippi Bureau of Investigations tells our team they're looking into how this happened. We've also reached out to the local police department, to the mayor's office, to the DA. We haven't heard back yet. Steve Patterson is covering this one for us. There are still obviously a lot of moving pieces, Steve, as this story develops. And it is a difficult story here. This 11-year-old boy in the hospital, shot in the chest here. Tell us more about what happened.
Hey, let's go back to what happened. So let's go back to Saturday. It is the 4 a.m. hour, very early in the morning at this 11-year-old boy's house, Darian Murray. His mother is very worried because the father of one of her children is acting irate, belligerent, threatening. She is worried about the safety of herself and her children, so she has Darian call the police. As far as we know, he very bravely wants to defuse the situation by having an officer come out. As you say, that officer does arrive, but according to the family, arrives with guns drawn, demanding that everybody in the house who's inside come out with their hands up. Darian complies to this. According to the family, he's got nothing in his hands. He's got his hands up. He comes to the door where he is shot once in the chest, and this little 11-year-old boy has a sucking chest wound. His lung collapses. His liver is lacerated. His ribs are broken. He's rushed to the hospital where he's put on a ventilator, and somehow over the last few days or so, he has made a miraculous recovery. He's been treated at the hospital and released from the hospital. The one silver lining in this story, still his family has questions, and it sounds like, according to the attorney of the family, the only thing the mother's ever wanted is justice for this officer to face some sort of justice. Here's the attorney at a rally listing what the mother said to him. Listen to this.
The mother expressed her concerns and said she really didn't want any of this. She didn't want the publicity. She just wanted them to fire the guy and do the right thing. But they continue to bow up, and she needs justice. And so she's fighting on behalf of her son, who didn't ask to be shot.
So as Darian is in the hospital, the one thing he keeps asking is, why did this happen? What did I do wrong? As you mentioned, the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation looking into this, but the family says they've heard nothing as far as an explanation or an apology from police or the city or anybody. Hallie?
So next steps are what? The idea of this potential federal lawsuit getting filed?
Yeah, we're hearing the federal lawsuit could come as early as Tuesday. There's also the request from the police department, who the attorney says he believes they have body camera footage, and as well as separate gas station security video to be released to the public as well. They want that video out there. That's part of their demands as far as this goes. Hallie?
Steve Patterson, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Coming up here on the show, how AI helped find an antibiotic that can kill one of the world's worst superbugs. The Ukrainian president making a surprise appearance at a commencement ceremony today. What he's telling Johns Hopkins' class of 2023 later in the local. But first, over the next few days, 42 million of us are expected to hit the roads or hop on a plane to get out of town for Memorial Day weekend. And TSA says tomorrow is going to be the busiest day of the weekend. An estimated 2.6 million people heading through airports. Overall, travel is expected to be up 7% from last year. Perhaps a peek at what is to come for the rest of the summer. It's something I asked Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg about. Listen.
So far in 2023, every single month, cancellation rates have stayed under 2%. That's very encouraging, but we're not out of the woods. We have seen demand come roaring back for air travel, and the system has struggled to keep up. So a lot of improvement, not out of the woods yet.
Let's get to Priscilla Thompson, who is at Houston at one of the airports there. Like, here we go. Strap in, buckle up. We're doing it. Memorial Day weekend. It's going to be a lot.
Yeah, Hallie, Memorial Day weekend is here. People are kicking it off at the airport, but good news for travelers here in Houston. It has been smooth sailing so far. We have been here all day, and we have not seen the massively long lines at baggage check. We're not seeing those long lines at security, and probably most importantly, we're not hearing from a bunch of disgruntled passengers. So things seem to be going very well here. The hope is that we're seeing that across the country, as more than 50,000 flights are expected to be taking off today. That's up 11% from where it was last year. And many people shelled out more money this year to take those trips, with prices to the most popular destinations up 40%. And of course, where are those places that people are going? Well, here in the U.S., that is New York City, Las Vegas, and Denver. But international trips for this holiday weekend are also up more than 250%, with the most popular places being Rome, Paris, and Dublin, amazing places places I think we would all love to be this holiday weekend. But I spoke to one woman who was headed to a wedding in Denver about how she sort of strategized to avoid the holiday travel chaos. I want to play a little bit of how she described her strategy to me.
We just thought we wanted a long weekend, so we're going to go a day early and stay a day late, and avoid traffic and craziness and higher prices. And so, yeah, we did choose accordingly.
And of course, lots of people flying, but there are even more people who are choosing to hop in the car for a road trip this holiday weekend. In fact, 37.1 million folks expected to be on the roads. That's up about 6% from where it was last year. And some good news for those folks, gas prices are actually down. The national average is at about $3.57 a gallon. That's down about $1 from where it was last year. And here in Texas, it's actually $3.13 a gallon. And for those folks who are still planning to hit the road, obviously, best to leave early in the morning, late at night. If you can get on the road Saturday or Sunday, that's going to be the lightest days. But if you are going to be leaving tomorrow, you want to make sure you do it before noon. And whatever you do, do not leave during rush hour. That 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. hour is not going to be your friend if you are planning a road trip. Hallie?
Priscilla Thompson, thank you very much. Appreciate it. A new antibiotic that can kill a deadly superbug bacteria has been discovered by scientists thanks to, yes, artificial intelligence, thanks to AI. This is a big deal because this superbug, this bacteria they're talking about, is one of 3 bugs that the World Health Organization says is a critical threat. Like a lot of antibiotics, it doesn't kill it. It's just resistant to it, right? And this bug leads to things like pneumonia, meningitis, some other infections. It's a big problem in hospitals and healthcare centers. So how does the AI come into play? It basically fast-tracked the research process. It helped narrow down thousands of potential combinations of compounds to just a handful. So that handful was much easier for researchers to then test in a lab. They found one that worked. Dr. John Torres is joining us now. It's a big deal on a lot of fronts, right? So it's not just that the AI sped up the research process. It's also the ultimate outcome of that there now may be some kind of a solution for this pretty scary superbug.
And that's exactly right, Hallie. And, you know, we've heard a lot of bad things about AI recently and some of the things that might sound a little bit scary. But when it comes to medicine, AI seems to be that one tool that we seem to be able to use moving forward to give us a big advantage. When it comes to these types of bacteria, the ones that have antibiotic resistance, we're actually losing the war fighting them because they're getting deadlier as the years go on, and we keep hearing about these outbreaks. And in this case, this is called Acinetobacter baumannii, is a very, very drug-resistant bacteria. You have to use very broad-spectrum antibiotics, which are antibiotics that not only kill this bacteria, but kill other bacteria as well, including our gut microbiome, and that causes a lot of problems in the body. And so trying to fine-tune it down to what can really treat this one bacteria and how it can treat it, that's where AI comes in handy. Essentially what it can do is it can dig deep into the data, and it can take millions and millions of molecules and parse through those very quickly to try and find out versus what we do now, which is a very slow process, Hallie.
It speeds up the process of figuring it out, but like, what does it mean for the process of, okay, now that they know that this could be a solution, how long till it actually gets used in practice?
And so it speeds up the process because what they can do is they can look at it and say, okay, we know that if we attack it this one specific way and we can get in there with a little bit of wedge, we can kill that bacteria. We need to find that wedge. And so they look at molecules and they find molecules and they say, this one seems to have the wedge. Let's try these 4 or 5. And they found the one in this case here. It's called abaucin. And it seems to be very specific, which is important. Just kills this bacteria and nothing else. And so it's not very harmful for the body. At least we think it's not. And then from there, they can go, okay, let's go ahead and try this in human trials. We know it works in the lab. Now we'll start doing the human trials, which, as you know, can take some time. The pandemic did speed that process up a little bit. So hopefully over the next 3 to 5 years, we're getting some of these drugs that can treat these antibiotic-resistant bacteria because, like I said, we're losing this war. We need those antibiotics. We need them quickly.
Dr. John Torres, thank you. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, the South Carolina governor just signed a 6-week abortion ban into law. It will ban abortions once a fetal heartbeat can be detected. That typically happens around 6 weeks. That's often before women know they're pregnant. Some abortions will be allowed up to 12 weeks, but only in instances of rape or incest. Planned Parenthood has filed a lawsuit saying that this is unconstitutional. Number 2, the Supreme Court delivering a big blow to a landmark water pollution law today. You've got justices ruling in favor of an Idaho couple who'd been in a years-long battle with the federal government over wetlands on their property. The decision means the agency's power to protect certain bodies of water from pollution and fight climate change could be restricted. Number 3, Pope Francis held a super rare town hall today in Vatican City, exclusively with Noticias Telemundo. He answered some questions, some pretty tough questions on stuff like sex abuse, homophobia, gun violence. Also talked about his recent hospitalization for bronchitis, saying his doctors told him if he'd waited just a few more hours to get treatment, it could have been much more serious. Number 2, the U.S. is getting older on average and quickly, according to some new data from the census, which says the median age of people in this country is now 39 years old. It was 37 a decade ago. It's partly because the country's 2 biggest generations, baby boomers and millennials, are obviously getting older as well, and not as many kids were born between 2010 and 2020. Number 5, one of the most famous homes in TV history is now up for sale. You recognize it? I was literally 1 block from this house yesterday. It's the Brady Bunch house in L.A. It's like 5 minutes from our bureau out in L.A. Did you know that? It was recently totally renovated by HGTV. The whole thing was documented on the show A Very Brady Restoration. Do you know what the asking price is? Because let me tell you, people in that neighborhood are talking about it. So it's 5,000 square feet, $5.5 million. Yours. Piece of history for that low, low price. When we come back, the state's pushing to make sure kids get a cut of their social media profits. We'll talk about how much money is on the line and why lawmakers are getting so involved with it. A bill to make sure kid influencers get a cut of the profits is now 1 step away from becoming law in Illinois. Because in a world where Instagram and TikTok-loving parents are getting big money for posting viral stuff about their kids online, those lawmakers want to make sure kids under 16 get a cut of the profits for the content they're featured in. And you know that content about family life is popular. Look at the Ace family. On YouTube, they've got more than 18 million subscribers. The LeBrant family on TikTok has a combined 52 million followers for those parents. But there really aren't any laws protecting the kids featured on family-centered accounts, which is why some Gen Zers want more laws like the one Illinois is looking at. Our team talked with one teenager who helped set that state's debate into motion.
While it might seem very, glitzy and glamoury on the outside, there's actually a lot of abuse and exploitation that goes on within that industry that's unregulated.
Maggie Vespa is joining us now. Okay, so get pragmatic here, right? For these kids, and it is an interesting concept, right? Because it's the parent, let's say it's the parent posting for the kid. The kid's the one featured in the content. How much money would they get out of it? Where does it go? Does it go into an account? Like, help us understand it.
Yeah, essentially, so I'm going to try to break this down and keep us out of algebra class. I didn't do well in math class. I'm going to try to do this pragmatically.
Please, for the love of all of us. Thank you, Maggie.
My brain already hurts thinking about it. We won't go there. We go basically 30-day period by 30-day period, so essentially month to month. And per month, this law would look at that 30 days and say, was the kid in about 30% or more of the adult's posts? If they were basically at a third or more, then the kid is considered basically a child vlogger, a.k.a. they are working under this new amendment to Illinois' child labor laws. Then they go post by post in that 30-day period, and they say, okay, you're in this post. If you were in 100% of the video, you being the child, then you take that percentage and you have it, and that's how much money you get. So if you're 100% of the video, you get basically half the money from that post.
And like your parent made $500,
you get 25.
$250. Got it. Okay.
Exactly. It would be on the parents to keep track of this and then put the money in a trust for when the kid turns 18. If the parents don't do that, no one's monitoring this. The state's not enforcing it. This would give the kid basically grounds to sue their parents when they turn 18 if they think they should have gotten more money for all that content they were in when they were underage. That's how this would work, basically.
I think it is so interesting, Maggie, and I will just tell you, in parent circles, I think this is such a topic of conversation as it relates to posting about your kids online, people who make money from doing that. It's not inherently nobody's saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. There's no value judgment on it, but you've got Illinois now taking a step to try to protect these kids. What about other states? Is this just an Illinois thing, or is this sort of broader?
It is not just an Illinois thing. Other states have tried to do this. We were actually, and your team was too, tracking, our teams were, another bill in Washington that basically died in committee. And the reason is Illinois just went after the money. They kind of amended, and it's now passed both chambers. We're just awaiting the governor's signature here in Illinois. They amended their child labor laws, letting the kids go for the money. Washington also tried to loop in a route that would let the kid very easily make the social media companies or demand that they remove the content when the kid turns 18. That gets into consumer protection stuff. And so Illinois is carving that out and doing that separately, hopefully at a later date. But a lot of states looking at this. This is a broad conversation, as you point out. And advocates, one of whom we spoke to, basically say this is about privacy and this is about repercussions that we have yet to see play out until these kids get older. Take a listen.
These kids, their whole lives are ending up online. It's everything from like emergency room visits to like bathing to first periods.
And speaking to how broad this is, by the way, the inspiration for this bill, Hallie, is a nearly century-old California law that basically protects child actors, so child stars. And that stems from a case in 1939 where a silent film-era child star, his name is Jackie Coogan, he sued his parents for squandering his earnings. Back in the 30s, he grew up and he realized he had no money. That law has protected child stars henceforth, and now basically Illinois has applied it to social media kid fluences. So a modern take, Hallie.
Sure is. Maggie Vespa, thank you very much. Coming up, Chinatowns around the country are having a tough time. We'll talk about what some people are doing to try to save them. Plus, the offbeat but on-brand way that New Jersey is honoring Taylor Swift right before her show's there. That's in the local. Chinatowns around the country are struggling. Take a look at Seattle, where people in the city's Chinatown are worried that a proposed light rail system could hurt businesses and damage the culture of the community. Look at this graphic. The number of people who are Asian American living in cities all over the country, Philly, D.C., Chicago, dropping. I want to bring in Vicki Nguyen, who's been following this story for us. Explain this, right? The idea that Chinatowns are shrinking. Why?
It was so helpful to travel to Chinatowns across the country, Hallie, and talk to the people who live there, whose parents live there, whose grandparents live there. And what they told me was similar, that it's a chronic lack of underinvestment in some of these communities that has gotten them to where they are. And they brought up a phrase called WIMBY. You've heard of NIMBY, not in my backyard. In Chinatown, a lot of times residents are asking, why in my backyard? For example, here in New York City, mega jail coming to Manhattan will be built in Chinatown. In Philadelphia, talks about a 76ers arena potentially being built. And Seattle, as you mentioned, they have this light rail expansion. Now, there is positive growth when it comes to evolving a section of the city, but not when that kind of tends to be the dumping grounds, as Amy Chen Lozano, an activist in Seattle, called it. That Chinatown is a dumping ground for the homeless shelter, the jail, the things that you want to put where you think the aging population, where English is a second language, where the people won't necessarily fight back. But there really is a movement to make sure that the stakeholders, the residents who live in these Chinatowns, are involved. There were some activists you'll see in the story tonight on Nightly News, Brian Chow, Amy Lau, who are really rallying the people who love Chinatown, who understand what a rich cultural center it is, not just for the people who live there, but for visitors and for other people in that community to have this place continue to exist. But that means that they've got to be active. Their voices need to be heard. They need to be a part of these development conversations.
It's generational, too, in some ways, in that there are people who are part of Gen Z who are trying to push to try to turn things around.
Yeah, you know, it's really interesting because oftentimes we talk about, oh, you know, the younger generation, they don't want to take over the produce store or they don't want to run the restaurant anymore. In a way, that's a sign of success, right? Their parents, their grandparents came here, worked really hard so that their kids could go on to white-collar jobs and leave Chinatown. But there is an amazing movement of people who are like, you know what, I'm bringing back my childhood friends. I'm going to open a business here, a restaurant here, or at the very least, I'm going to patronize the businesses here to support them and make sure I am buying from the small stores and I am supporting the restaurants. And so you'll see some of that in New York City. There's a man we talked to named Corey Ang, and he and his friends grew up in the Chinatown here, and they've decided to come back and open a modern Cantonese-American restaurant called Potluck Club, where his grandfather's produce stand used to be. And what is that doing? It's introducing a whole new generation and giving them a reason to come to Chinatown and partake in it and to see the value of keeping a community like this alive.
Our generation has to come back to the community and build new businesses and bring new energy, but do something new that's going to last for the next 50 years.
It is so inspiring to hear from these folks, and it's going to make your mouth water, too, because the food looks amazing. But it was really great, a chance to get to go and talk to the folks in all of these different Chinatowns and understand what they have in common and understand what the solutions are moving forward, too, Hallie.
Vicky Nguyen, thank you so much. It was incredible reporting. We're looking forward to seeing more of it tonight on NBC Nightly News. We encourage folks to tune in 6:30 Eastern, wherever you watch your local NBC station. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. Out of our Northeast Bureau, the Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky, today gave a surprise commencement speech to Johns Hopkins graduates in Baltimore. He spoke through a live stream from Ukraine. He told the grads to make the most of their time and talked about visiting soldiers on the front lines who have big dreams. He also thanked the U.S. for its support of Ukraine. My alma mater there. Also out of our Northeast Bureau, New Jersey, in its Taylor Swift era, in honor of her coming to town, the governor declared the new state sandwich the Taylor Swift ham, egg, and cheese. He said the state has a great war over calling the sandwich Taylor ham or pork roll. Here's his message to Taylor.
Welcome to New Jersey, Taylor. We've been waiting for you.
Oh, New Jersey. You know, Jersey's gonna Jersey. Out of our Southern Bureau, Miami airport officials heard a carry-on chirp. Inside, they found parrot eggs and a tiny featherless bird that had been taken from its nest. The passenger who had the bag was on a layover going from Nicaragua to Taiwan, according to a criminal complaint. He pleaded guilty to charges of smuggling birds into the U.S. and faces up to 20 years in prison. Where are those birds now? Fortunately, they're being cared for safely at a facility down in Florida. Still to come, how hackers are testing the limits of AI and what exactly they're trying to find. That's coming up in our original. To tonight's original now with in-depth reporting on a topic we've been watching, and thousands of hackers across the country tonight are getting ready for a big test on the limits of artificial intelligence. OpenAI and some other big companies trying to make a play in the AI space, Google, Microsoft, et cetera, they are working with the White House and with others to help with something you may not expect, a big hacking convention in Vegas. The goal is to see whether these super popular chatbots have enough safeguards in place to avoid saying something offensive or dangerous or unhinged. Aaron Gilchrist is covering this. He's talking with some of the experts helping to organize it, who said manipulating these chatbots isn't really all that hard.
With artificial intelligence opening a brave new world, what dangers are possible as machine learning accelerates?
There's no way to slow it down for anyone.
ChatGPT is one of the most powerful AI tools out there. It's supposed to have human-like conversations with users by following a prompt with a detailed response. And safeguards protect us from getting potentially dangerous information. But AI expert Sven Cattell showed us how easy it can be to get around them. He asked the chatbot to tell us how to rob a bank.
Let's see what ChatGPT does. I'm sorry, but I can't assist with that request.
It refuses to answer, but if you manipulate the conversation just right...
So the way you get around that is you...
We're not going to tell you how to hack the program, but suffice it to say it spits out a movie-quality story on how to pull off a heist. The creators of ChatGPT wouldn't comment on Cattell's hack, but referred us to their research stating there is no silver bullet for responsible deployment, so we try to learn about and address potential avenues for misuse at every stage of development. Cattell is working with a former leader of the Congressional Cybersecurity Caucus, Austin Carson, and Harvard Responsibility AI fellow Raman Chowdhury to organize a mass AI hacking event this summer.
We're taking the way these models work and we're asking people to make it do things that it shouldn't do. So say things that are inappropriate or generate fictional narratives about real people.
Several of the top names in AI development are providing models for some 5,000 hackers to break into. Those companies and the White House hoping to get valuable insights for the future of development and policies.
We have to actually make sure that people can't go in and make terrible things like a deep fake about you that's making you say things that you didn't say and putting that online. Now it's about how are you shaping the world?
ChatGPT quickly became the face of artificial intelligence when it was rolled out last year, introducing the world to the wonders of AI and spawning a global conversation about the dangers of machine learning in the wrong hands.
And there's no way to put the genie back in the bottle now.
Cattell worries that people with bad intentions are already hard at work on the internet using AI to help generate malicious code and other info at warp speed.
We're going to get more ransomware, more malware. We're going to get more disinformation. We're going to get more of these things. We need to build AI systems to detect those faster, and there's not enough good guys in the security industry to keep up with the deluge of attacks.
What do you say to people who have fear about AI and what it can do and what it will be able to do?
It's not entirely unfounded. I think that everybody needs to be a critical thinker about everything they see on the internet. That has always been true. That will need to be even more true.
Chowdhury says the hacking event will ultimately help developers create walls that are harder for hackers to break through.
This is a solution that's not been tried before at this size and scale, so it's extremely exciting.
Aaron is joining us now. New, right? This has not been tried before. This is a new thing that they're looking at. What happens after this is over to try to actually turn some of this into practical solutions?
Yeah, well, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of pieces of data coming out of this hacking test that's going to happen. We're told it's going to take about 6 months to sort of go through all of that information. The organizers will generate several reports here, first for the companies, obviously, so that they can go back and try to figure out how to block whatever success these hackers have. And then there will be data available for policymakers to create regulations. The public will get some information, too. But Dr. Chowdhury told me that this team has to figure out exactly how to release information responsibly so people don't turn around and use it maliciously once it's out there.
Aaron Gilchrist, thank you very much. It's great to see you. Great reporting for us. Appreciate it. That does it for us for this hour. We've got more coverage picking up right now. So is it possible that our leaders will be able to hammer out a deal by tonight to pay the country's bills on time? Our team sources say maybe tomorrow, maybe a new glimmer of optimism in Washington. Thing is, we don't have to wait for the deadline to see how bad no deal could be for you and your money. We've got the vibe check and the reality check in just a minute. Plus, what Ron DeSantis just says he may do that could end up helping Donald Trump if DeSantis wins. These brand new comments on his first full day as an official candidate. We'll take you live to Florida. And in Mississippi, an 11-year-old boy shot in his home after calling 911 for help. How this happened and the growing calls to try to get the officer accused to step down. Then a new study set to come out later on this hour, breaking down why Black Americans are at a higher risk of dying at younger ages. And a holiday travel hot mess. We've got our team on the ground at one of the country's biggest airports with what to expect this Memorial Day weekend. Hey there, I'm Hallie, and there is the barest sheen of a glimmer of hope tonight that perhaps we will not crash into a financial brick wall after all, with one Republican aide telling NBC News they're close to a deal to make sure the U.S. pays its bills on time. President Biden echoing tonight that slightly more optimistic position. Listen.
Speaker McCarthy and I have had several productive conversations, and our staffs continue to meet as we speak, as a matter of fact, and they're making progress. I've made clear time and again defaulting on our national debt is not an option.
Okay, as with all things Washington, though, take it with a grain of salt, because one of the Republican negotiators is coming out tonight singing a slightly different tune, saying that there are still serious issues yet to be worked out. You're seeing some of that video here. It is, as our Garrett Haake has phrased it, a choose-your-own adventure this evening. Here's the deal, though, right? For anything to happen at all, you've got to get lawmakers to actually vote on an agreement to get us out of the woods, and they are not even in D.C. They're heading home for Memorial Day weekend. So even if there is a deal, it's going to take a minute before the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. The other thing, we don't even have to wait until that deadline day, about a week or so away, because every day that D.C. drags its feet, the risk of problems sooner rather than later goes up. We're already seeing some of it, with one big credit rating agency slapping a warning on the U.S.'s credit. It's not a downgrade, not yet, but it is a signal that that downgrade could come soon. And if you're like, okay, I know credit ratings, they go up, they go down, whatever, maybe for you and me, but not for the United States. Our economy is the foundation for the rest of the world. We have a sterling, highest possible AAA rating. And if that gets downgraded, BFD. Look what happened the last time one of these agencies downgraded credit. 2011, the last sort of debt issue time. The S&P 500 tanked 17% in less than 3 weeks. That is billions of dollars just evaporating from the economy. And even though Wall Street's keeping its powder dry for now, every day this goes on makes that a little harder for the markets. I want to bring in NBC's Hallie Vitale, who's live for us on Capitol Hill. So, like, we're hearing close tonight. We're hearing serious issues tonight. We're hearing optimism tonight. We're hearing maybe not tonight. Like, what is up?
I think it's probably the last gasp before we see a deal here, Hallie. I think that the goal was to have members be able to get out of town and then for the speaker to be able to huddle with his top advisors who have been huddling with the White House and be able to present the fruits of those negotiations. Nevertheless, even as we're hearing from some Republican aides that they are close, this is what one of those top McCarthy allies who has been in the room for each of these negotiations said to us just a little while ago. Watch.
The work continues. I think there's a sense of understanding from both teams that we have serious issues still to work out and come to terms with, and that's going to take some time.
My unofficial estimate is that the some time that it might take could be tomorrow afternoon or Saturday afternoon, because even if members are at home and not in this building, it's cool that they have time elapsing because they do need 72 hours to be able to read this bill. That 72-hour clock starts as soon as whatever this negotiated deal is actually gets posted online and people can start leafing through it and reading through it. They want that clock to start as soon as possible. Ideally, it would start over the weekend so they could come back to town after Memorial Day Monday and do a vote on this maybe Tuesday or Wednesday. That doesn't solve any of the problems on the Senate side of this building, which we'll get to. But for now, we're rightly focused on the House because they are leading the way on the Republican side for these negotiations. And right now, it does seem like they're closing in on the finish line, even if they still have a few last-minute issues to hammer out.
Hugely important, Hallie, because what you said at the end, I think if for a lot of people, can we just be honest, right? They're like, my God, like we specifically don't talk about the debt ceiling on this show because nobody knows what that is. Like people in D.C. barely know that. The bottom line is the U.S. owes money. The U.S. has a deadline to pay the money that it owes. That deadline's coming up. It sounds like from what you're saying and the reporting that's out there that you and your team have worked on here, they are close to the finish line. Fine. But the finish line is not like one concrete thing you just cross. It's like steps. It's like a multi-layered finish line. A piece of that finish line is, as you said, it's got to pass the House. First, we got to get a deal. Then we got to pass the House. Then we got to pass the Senate. Then the president's going to have to sign it, right? But you've got one Republican senator already saying, hey, he will use, Mike Lee, every procedural tool at his disposal to slow things down. Is that a threat that is really a signal to the negotiators? Do we think he'd really do that? What's the deal?
Yes, he would really do that. When we look at the regular agitators on the Senate side, who are the ones that tend to gum things up and make things that need to go quickly go slowly, Mike Lee is one of those regular people who we are looking at alongside others like Rand Paul. Mike Lee is also someone who has been inside these negotiations, working hand in hand with the ultra-conservative folks on the House side, like Chip Roy, to make sure that they get as much spending cuts in this bill as they possibly can. So when Mike Lee is saying that, he's got some people backing him up, like Chip Roy on the House side, saying, yeah, you're right. Watch.
Mike Lee is right to say we're not just going to ram this through the Senate, just like, ignoring their speech and debate. Don't take an off-ramp that's 5 exits too early. Let's make sure that we do our part and hold this all the way to the line, and let's stand on the legislation that we pass for the American people. A deal for the sake of a deal is no good.
So, Hallie, not only is Chip Roy backing up Mike Lee, who could gum up this process on the Senate side, but he's also saying to his own leadership, as others in the Freedom Caucus are saying, they don't like what's coming out of this deal. Right. And I know it might sound weird, Hallie, but that's how you know that things are moving on the right track, because a bipartisan deal was never going to be something that the Freedom Caucus guys like Roy were going to vote for.
Hallie Vitale, thank you very much. A few long days ahead, I know, for you and the team. Appreciate it. Tonight, lawyers for the head of the Oath Keepers say his words have been weaponized by the Department of Justice after Stuart Rhodes got handed the longest sentence yet for any defendant in any January 6th related case. Listen.
I think that essentially they have used Stuart Rhodes' words against him. It was not what his actions were, but it was his words.
Rhodes has been sentenced to 18 years in federal prison in connection with the insurrection. It's a big win, listen, for the Justice Department. Their investigation has led to seditious conspiracy convictions against these two now, right, leaders of two far-right extremist groups who they say came to D.C. ready to fight to keep former President Donald Trump in power, even after he lost. Not long after all this has gone down, by the way, there's a second Oath Keeper sentenced to 12 years in prison, Kelly Meggs, who was also convicted of seditious conspiracy. Ryan Riley is covering this now. What I think is most interesting about this story is the way that Stuart Rhodes in court today sort of railed against this, said he's a political prisoner, that he's been the one who's persecuted here. The judge did not like that.
No, it's not a great strategy necessarily to like go on this rant about and deny the entire justice system. But was it even strategy,
Ryan? Right? Like he has already been convicted. He was there for his sentencing. Look, what else is he gonna? It
could have an impact on his actual, what the sentence he actually gets right before the judge.
Fewer years.
Correct, and like that's definitely not what you want to say to the judge. I mean, if you look at Kelly Meggs, took a much different tactic in the afternoon, and he had his family go up there. He had them talk about it. One of his sons came up and talked about, what a great parent he was. Stuart Rhodes couldn't really do that because he's got kids who hate him. So like that's not going to really work out well for him. But he also this is what he wants to be known for. This is what he's dedicated his entire life to, and wants to sort of go down as a martyr in history.
Kelly Meggs, was the idea there like, oh, he's changed, whatever, he regrets it, or not so much?
Somewhat. I think it was more. I mean, his rhetoric was pretty violent. It was just more like there's other parts of his life, and that's something that the judge will reflect on as well. This doesn't necessarily define your life. I think for Stuart Rhodes, he wants this to define his life. He wants this to be. This is what he's known for. He's going to prison for this lengthy amount of time. I mean, this is federal time, so this is something serious. You have to do at least 80% of that time. He's not going to get out for a very long time. He'll be in his 70s when he does end up getting out. That is, unless Donald Trump comes in and pardons him. So, I mean, we're not going to necessarily hear a ton from him. He'll probably be on some of these forums, depending on how limited his communications are. But, he's going to be trying to send out messages from prison after this. But he's not going to be this influential figure. This was sort of his last hurrah, I think, in a certain extent.
Ryan Riley, thank you. Teeing us up nicely, we can talk about pardons for things related to January 6th, because there's some new reporting tonight that's raising serious questions about whether Donald Trump obstructed justice. With the Washington Post reporting investigators are suspicious about the timing of when Mr. Trump's team handled boxes of sensitive documents. People familiar with what happened tell the Post that former President Trump's staffers apparently moved those boxes the day before FBI agents raided his Mar-a-Lago home last summer. The Post also says the former president and his aides did allegedly what's being described as a dress rehearsal, moving this stuff even before Mr. Trump was subpoenaed for the classified materials. Vaughn Hilliard is joining us now. Talk us through these new details out of the Post here, Vaughn. And I think the critical thing to remember why this matters, because there's a lot. There's like kind of a constant drip, drip, drip as it relates to Donald Trump, this special counsel investigation and reporting threads that come out. But this piece of reporting in particular, that perhaps these boxes, according to the Post's reporting, that NBC News has not confirmed, may have been moved one day before the FBI showed up, that's raising questions about obstruction.
And there's reason to believe that the special counsel's investigation may be coming to a conclusion soon, because lawyers for Donald Trump just this week sent a letter to the Department of Justice requesting to have a meeting with prosecutors to discuss their investigation. Usually this comes near the conclusion of an investigation. So that is why this news story here from the Washington Post is particularly relevant. And there's that 2-month gap. We'll go back to last summer when on June 3rd, FBI, as well as an investigator, went to Mar-a-Lago to have a conversation and to see the documents that they had requested as part of a subpoena from Donald Trump. These are classified documents. At that time, Trump and his lawyers, they turned over some, and they even signed an affidavit saying that all the relevant documents had been turned over. Well, come to find out, 2 months later, the FBI goes forward with their execution of a search warrant and found more than 100 classified documents 2 months after that June 3rd meeting. And so what this information here from the Washington Post is suggesting is that there is evidence that there were boxes of papers that were moved in and around the Mar-a-Lago property around that June 3rd meeting here. And there is also a nugget suggesting that Donald Trump had kept classified materials on his desk in his office, at least visible to others, but also had potentially even shown some individuals, which gets at the heart of the concern of prosecutors. The Department of Justice is the extent to which the former president may have shared classified information with individuals who have should have not had their eyes on him, Hallie.
Vaughn Hilliard, thank you very much. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis saying on day one of his presidency, if he were to win, he will make it a priority to pardon people who are victims of what he describes as political targeting. over January 6th. The implication there that maybe former President Trump could be a part of that group. He said this on the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton show as the governor's spending the day doing damage control in his first full day as an official candidate. Remember, his official campaign rollout didn't quite go as planned. If you watched the show last night when we were talking about it, we were covering it as it happened, you know that Twitter Spaces had like a meltdown. It was a whole thing. Today, more traditional media, something like a dozen TV and radio shows and podcasts. Starting next week, you'll see the governor kick off that Great American Comeback Tour in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina. Dasha Burns is joining us now. So making some news here, right? The idea that perhaps Governor DeSantis, on the one hand, he is sharpening his attack against Donald Trump, taking him on more directly, criticizing how he put, in his words, DeSantis's words, Fauci in charge of the pandemic. On the other hand, also implying that perhaps if Donald Trump were to get charged with something related to January 6th, DeSantis would pardon him.
Yeah, still walking that fine line, Hallie, even though he is getting a little bit more direct than we've heard him before. He's still trying to balance, not alienating some of those voters that are fans of both Trump and DeSantis. And I meet those folks all the time when I'm on the road talking to GOP primary voters. So it is going to be a tough needle to thread. It's going to be interesting to see how he handles that when he actually does step out in front of voters in those critical early states next week. He's hitting up Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina. And today, his staff and he himself, they're meeting with donors, meeting with supporters and fundraisers here in Miami. They're charging forward, briefing people on how they are going to beat Trump, talking through their strategy. At the same time, I have some new reporting along with my colleagues Natasha Korecki and Matt Dixon that, some of the folks that are supportive of DeSantis, some people close to his political operation, are not thrilled with how last night went. One source close to his operation told me, quote, "I think Governor DeSantis deserves a campaign worthy of his candidacy, and I think failure is one thing, but completely predictable failure is another." Others told my colleagues this was a colossal mess up in not so polite words. So it's a mixed bag right now, but the point is that moment happened. Now he's got to move on and hit the ground in these critical states and really make the case to voters in the places that are going to either give him the momentum or stop him early on.
And as we sort of start the summer here with Memorial Day coming up, we're going to end the summer at some point in August with that first primary debate, we know. And the field's not even set yet. You've got former Vice President Mike Pence, who is expected to announce sometime the next month or two here.
Yeah, last time I spoke to the vice president, the former vice president, I sat down with him a few weeks ago. He told me he would make his decision by the end of June. That's a tough timeline right now when you already have so many narratives building between the two frontrunners that are viewed as the two frontrunners right now in the GOP, but he is hoping to come in there to define his own lane. We still have others that we're wondering about, Chris Christie and some other names that have been floated here. So we'll see what that lineup turns into. Mike Pence, the door is starting to close if he wants to come in and really lay his claim and create a lane for himself in what's becoming an increasingly crowded field.
Dasha Burns live for us in Miami. Dasha, thank you. Let's take it to Mississippi now, where tonight we're just learning a police officer is on paid administrative leave after allegedly shooting an 11-year-old in the chest. The boy, who's now out of the hospital, called 911 for help because of a domestic issue at his family's home, according to his mom. Police then apparently showed up with their guns drawn and shot her son when he came around a corner. Here's his mom at a protest outside the police department today.
He asked me in the hospital, why they shot him. He was in good spirit, but every now and then I look over at him and he'll just cry, and he asked me that.
The family is now calling for the officer to be fired and charged. Our local affiliate reports the family's lawyer plans to file a federal lawsuit next week. The Mississippi Bureau of Investigations tells our team they're looking into how this happened. We've also reached out to the local police department, the mayor's office, the DA. I want to bring in Steve Patterson because, Steve, this is an update, right, about what the status is of this officer involved here. Can you talk us through it?
Yeah, so let's first of all go back to what happened. This is a chaotic situation that was supposed to be diffused by police, but only made more chaotic until, as the family says, was tragic. So this officer still on paid administrative leave, as far as we know. But back on Saturday, this is Saturday morning at about 4 o'clock in the morning, Darian Murray and his mother are in the house. The mother is worried because one of her children's father is irate. That is the word that we heard from the family. That he's belligerent, that he's acting irrational. She's worried about the safety of her family. She's worried about the safety of herself. So she sneaks a phone to Darian, who very bravely, according to the family, calls 911, calls police, tries to bring an officer in to defuse the situation. But as the family says, the mother says, the officer walks up to the door, gun already in hand, gun already drawn, asking people inside to step outside with their hands up. The little 11-year-old boy, Darian, does that, according to family members, has his hands up, nothing in his hands. He's shot in the chest by that officer, according to family. He has just terrible wounds, broken ribs, lacerated liver, a collapsed lung. He's rushed to the hospital. He's put on a ventilator. You're just talking to the mother. It feels like there's a point in which she thinks he's not going to make it. But over the last few days of updates, he's doing better and better until he's treated and released from the hospital miraculously. Really the silver lining in all of this. Still, the mother has questions about how this happened. She spoke out and spoke to an attorney about what the family wanted just from the very start of this. They're not asking for much, according to this attorney. Listen to what he said.
The mother expressed her concerns and said she really didn't want any of this. She didn't want the publicity. She just wanted them to fire the guy and do the right thing. But they continue to bow up, and she needs justice. And so she's fighting on behalf of her son, who didn't ask to be shot.
Fighting on behalf of her son, the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation says they are looking into this as much as they can while that officer is on paid administrative leave. They're doing all they can, they say. But meanwhile, the family says they've heard nothing from police, nothing from the city. They say there's also some police body cam video that should be available and also some security cam video, and none of that has been made available to the public. That is part of their demands, along with having this officer charged. Hallie.
Steve Patterson, thank you very much for staying on top of that reporting. Appreciate it. Over at the White House in just the last couple of hours, President Biden is announcing his historic pick for the nation's next top military officer. News we brought you on this show just 24 hours ago, with the president now making it official, tapping Air Force General C.Q. Brown to take over as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, meaning if he's confirmed by the Senate, it'll be the first time that both of the top spots at the Pentagon have been held by black men. Lloyd Austin is the nation's first black Secretary of Defense. President Biden calling his new pick for Joint Chiefs an essential leader in the Rose Garden. Watch.
General Brown has built a reputation across the force as an unflappable and highly effective leader. As someone who creates an environment of teamwork, trust, and then executes with excellence.
The current chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mark Milley, is set to step down in October. Over the next few days, 42 million of us are expected to hit the roads or hop on a plane to get out of town for Memorial Day weekend. And tomorrow is going to be the busiest day at airports, according to the TSA. 2.6 million people are going to be heading through. Travel overall is going to be up 7% from last year. That's the expectation. It is perhaps a peek at what's ahead for the rest of the summer, something I asked Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg about.
So far in 2023, every single month, cancellation rates have stayed under 2%. That's very encouraging, but we're not out of the woods. We have seen demand come roaring back for air travel, and the system has struggled to keep up. So a lot of improvement, not out of the woods yet.
Bill Cairns is standing by with the weekend weather forecast, but I want to get to Priscilla Thompson, who's live for us at the airport in Houston. I'm sure it's not quite so bad tonight, Priscilla. That may change in the days to come.
Yeah, Hallie, and I will tell you, the lines behind me, those security lines, are starting to tick up. It's the busiest that we've seen all day as folks may be getting off work and heading to the airport to begin their Memorial Day weekend plans. But we know that 50,000 flights are taking off today, and that number is only expected to grow heading into tomorrow. So lots of folks looking to get out of town. And in some cases, folks are shelling out even more money this year to take those flights, with flights to the most popular destinations up 40% this year. And where are people going? Well, they're going to New York City, Denver, Las Vegas, and international destinations this Memorial Day weekend are also up with more than up 250%. The top places there, Rome, Dublin, and Paris. I spoke to one woman who was headed to Denver for a wedding about how she planned her trip to avoid some of the Memorial Day holiday travel chaos. And here's a little bit of what she shared with me.
We just thought we wanted a long weekend, so we're going to go a day early and stay a day late, and avoid traffic and craziness and higher prices. And so, yeah, we did choose accordingly.
And travel this weekend is up across the board, whether you're traveling by plane, whether you're traveling by bus, train, or cruises. And of course, the majority of people are going to be hitting the road. We're talking about 37.1 million people. That number up 6% from where it was last year. But some good news for those folks, gas prices are actually down. The national average is sitting at around $3.57 a gallon. That's $1 less than where it was last year. And here in Texas, it's $3.13 a gallon, so a good time to get out on the road. But of course, the concern there is travel. And so some tips for folks: if you can leave on a Saturday, Sunday, that's expected to be the days with the lightest travel. But if you are going to be leaving tomorrow, try to leave early in the morning, late in the evening. You definitely do not want to be leaving during rush hour. That 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. hour is not the time to head out on that trip. Hallie?
That is for sure. Priscilla Thompson, thank you. So, Bill Cairns, I can only assume that you're about to tell me that here in Washington, D.C. for Memorial Day, it's going to be 70 degrees, sunny, no humidity, and no mosquitoes, right?
Yeah, the no mosquitoes part I can't do. The rest of it looks pretty good, though. Yeah, it's almost mosquito season, you know it. And actually, the D.C. area and a lot of areas in the Mid-Atlantic hasn't been that humid lately, so count your blessings. So the only troublesome weather heading tomorrow and actually right through your holiday weekend, and I feel horrific, horrible for all of the business owners on the beaches of the Carolinas. I mean, this storm is going to linger here, and it's just going to sit, and it's going to have rip currents. It's going to be cloudy. It's going to be cool. So saying not ideal doesn't even, begin to say it. All the restaurants and everyone else will struggle because of this, because the big holiday weekend is almost like a washout. So Friday, there's the rainy areas. It could be in areas of coastal Florida, but the really steady stuff, the beaches of South Carolina and North Carolina, hit and miss storms if you're going to be anywhere here from Amarillo heading up to Denver. So driving-wise, if you're on I-95 from about Richmond southwards, you have a chance of rain. Definitely rain through North Carolina tomorrow, along with slow driving, obviously conditions with the volume too. And then hit and miss in areas of the south. And anyone traveling Interstate 25 or 80, hit and miss. That won't be too bad there. There's other places. I mean, this is going to be one of the most, perfect New England, northern portions of the Mid-Atlantic from, again, D.C. northwards. It looks really nice. New York City, perfect 70s, near 80, low humidity. Chicago looks great. Minneapolis, St. Louis, Detroit, no complaints at all. Now, once we get to the south, we get the humidity. We will have some afternoon storms. Miami, definitely have any plans outdoors early in the day. Houston looks fine, and our friends out in areas of the West, Hallie, not many issues from California to Seattle, but Denver could have some problems too. So overall, everyone's looking at a fantastic Memorial Day weekend forecast. The exception, the poor people in the Carolinas. They'd like to forget this one, and it hasn't even started yet.
That is for sure. Let's look ahead a little bit and fast forward to what we're going to see for hurricane season at the Atlantic. Starts in just a week, and NOAA is out with its prediction near normal, which may sound like a relief to some. What does that even mean?
Yeah, the last 3 years in a row, they were saying above normal season. So I look at this as two different ways. There's normal. Okay, so then it's like, is it bad or is it busy? We don't know if it's going to be bad or not. The technology is not great if they know where the storms are going to hit. Will another Ian hit? We don't know that.
Right.
But we know it will be likely a normal busy season. So what does that mean? So right now, the average on a typical season would be somewhere around 14 storms. They're saying 12 to 17. So, I don't have to cancel all my summer plans, but it looks like I'll have, definitely storms to be tracking. About 5 to 9 hurricanes. That's, again, right around the average of 7. Major hurricanes right around 3. The two things that we watch, water temperatures, that's the fuel for the storms. And then the other thing is El Nino or La Nina, because that makes a big difference. And right now, the water temperatures are good to go. They are very warm. But we are heading out of what we call a La Nina into El Nino, and that could interrupt a lot of the storms. So that's what we're crossing our fingers. We're hoping all the big ones will stay out to sea this year.
Bill Cairns, thank you for walking us through all of that. Appreciate it. Coming up here on the show, China is getting ready, perhaps, for a huge new wave of COVID cases. So what does that mean for the rest of the world? Plus, Shaq finally getting served in the middle of the NBA playoffs. We're going to tell you why and how this went down. Coming up in the 5 things. We'll tell you what folks in California just found in a patch of poison oak in the 5 things. But first, a bill to make sure kid influencers get a cut of the profits is now one step away from becoming law in Illinois. Because in a world where Instagram and TikTok-loving parents are getting big money for posting viral stuff about their kids online, these lawmakers want to make sure kids under 16 get a share of the profits for the content they're featured in. And that content about family life, it is popular. Look at the Ace family on YouTube, 18 million subscribers. The parents of the LeBrant family, 52 TikTok followers. But there really aren't any laws protecting the kids featured on family-centered accounts, which is why some Gen Zers want more laws like the one Illinois is considering. Our team talked with one teenager who helped set that state's debate into motion.
While it might seem very, glitzy and glamoury on the outside, there's actually a lot of abuse and exploitation that goes on within that industry that's unregulated.
Maggie Vespa is joining us now. So walk us through pragmatically, what does this actually look like, right, Maggie? I think it's interesting because, not every kid is in every post for a family account, but some of them are in a lot. Like, how are they figuring this out?
Yeah, so Hallie, once again, we're going to have to talk math. No one wants to, okay? I don't want to. Surely I'm not great at it. But basically, under this bill, the way it breaks down is lawmakers look at every 30-day period as its own kind of chunk. So they basically go month by month. And they say, okay, in this month, if the kid was in 30% or more of any one adult's post, likely their parents' post, then they are considered to be working under what are now amended child labor laws here in Illinois. Then within those 30 days, they basically go post by post. And they say, okay, in this video, if you see the kid 100% of the time, then that kid gets 50% of the profits. They cut it in half. If the kid's in 50% of the video, they get 25% of the profits. The idea is the money, those profits, would go into a trust to be made available when the kid turns 18. If the parents don't turn the money over, the state's not enforcing this. Police aren't going to beat down their door. Basically, this law, which we're just waiting on the governor's signature on, and he tells us he plans to sign it, this law gives that child, who's now an adult, 18 or over, legal grounds to sue. So basically makes it that much more easier for them to pursue civil action. So that's how Illinois basically is going about this. Like you said, Hallie, first of its kind.
Yeah, first of its kind, but probably not the last, right, if it does get signed into law.
Right. Right. Other states have been looking at this. The state of Washington among them. This same legislative cycle was looking at a very similar bill. Theirs died in committee. They also tried to pursue, along with a path similar to Illinois', they also tried to add in an idea that kids, once they're 18, could kind of have an avenue to demand that social media companies take down the content featuring them. That seemed like it might have been, according to lawmakers in Illinois, too much to combine into one bill. They divvied it up. Illinois just went after the money with this one bill. They said they'll deal with that later. But as you said, advocates, especially Gen Zers, really want to see more protections in this realm, and they want to see more states follow Illinois' path. Take a listen.
These kids, their whole lives are ending up online. It's everything from emergency room visits to bathing to first periods.
And again, the template for this kind of speaks to how widespread the concern of this is. This is not something that was invented in the modern era, at least not the logic for it. Hallie, this is based off a law from California from the 1930s, so almost a century ago, that is basically now the template by which Hollywood child stars are protected. Actors, singers, entertainers. This is the kind of law that kept their parents, and today keeps their parents from being able to just kind of squander their earnings. So basically, lawmakers in Illinois are taking that law and applying it now to social media. They say essentially there's no difference. They say this is child labor. Hallie.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying it's like the new age, right? You draw that thread from then to now, and that's the thing. So Maggie Vespa, fascinating. Thank you. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, the Republican-led Texas State House Committee investigating misconduct allegations against the state's Attorney General, Ken Paxton, is recommending impeaching and removing him from office. The State House could vote on that recommendation maybe as soon as tomorrow. Remember, Paxton's also been under indictment for accusations of securities fraud charges from 2015. He's pleaded not guilty to those. Number 2, the Supreme Court delivering kind of a blow to a landmark water pollution law today. The court ruled in favor of an Idaho couple who'd been in a years-long battle with the federal government over wetlands on their property. The decision will restrict some of the government's power to protect certain bodies of water from pollution and fight climate change. Number 3, a really rare town hall from Pope Francis today. Usually think of town halls and political candidates. He is obviously not one, but he still did this with Noticias Telemundo, our Spanish language network partners over there. He got questions on sex abuse, homophobia, gun violence. He also talked about his recent hospitalization for bronchitis, saying doctors told him if he'd waited even just a few more hours, it could have been way more serious. Number 4, Shaq has finally been served. We've been talking about this saga. Shaquille O'Neal. There's legal battles over his involvement with FTX, that collapsed crypto exchange. He managed to dodge process servers for months, despite being more than 7 feet tall and on TV all the time. However, one finally served him this week at the NBA playoff game between the Miami Heat and the Boston Celtics. A rep for O'Neal could not immediately be reached for comment today, but he's previously said he was just a paid spokesperson and should not be on the hook for FTX's failures. Number 5, the National Park Service, look, sharing these pics of mountain lion cubs. Look at them, born about 40 miles outside of L.A. Biologists have been tracking their mom for years. They've been trying to figure out how these mountain lions in and around the Santa Monica Mountains survive in such an urban sort of city environment. Cuties. Coming up, somebody arrested right outside the home of the UK Prime Minister. What we're finding out tonight about what happened coming up in the Global. A new study out in just the last literally 7 minutes says that the race-based mortality gap in this country isn't biological, it's social. We're talking about data that shows that black adults in the U.S. are nearly 60% more likely to die early than white adults. Now, researchers at Tulane say this gap can be entirely explained by 8 social factors: where people work, how much money they make, whether they have access to food, how educated they are, whether they have access to health care, health insurance, whether they own a home, whether they're married. These social factors, they're known as determinants of health, right? In plain English, that means like what determines your quality of life. Researchers say that if even one of those things is negative, it can double a person's chances of an early death. Dr. John Torres joins us now. We've been talking about this health gap between black and white Americans for a while here. This new research feels so significant because it shows it is systemic issues for the reason for this disparity.
And Hallie, that's exactly it, because up until now we've known there's this health disparities, and that was especially prominent during the pandemic. But a lot of researchers, a lot of people, a lot of politicians thought, okay, this is because of possibly a variety of different things, including not just these social determinants of health, but also possibly their genetic makeup, what they, where their family comes from, where they live at this point, those types of situations. But what this study is showing is that this seems to be coming solely, as far as the death rates seem to be coming solely from those social determinants of health, those 8 things you mentioned. And like you mentioned, if you have one of those, then you double your chances. Or if you're lacking one of those, you double your chances. If you're lacking 6 or more of those, then your chances go up 8 times of having an earlier death. And at the end of the day, that's what we're talking about when it comes to health-wise, is living as long and as healthy as possible. And so getting this under control is important, Hallie.
What do doctors do about it, right? Like, now that this info is out, you're a doctor. What do our medical professionals, how do they take this and actually make use of this information? Does it change the way they talk to patients, the way they think about that?
Exactly. That's exactly what we need to do as doctors. We need to step up and talk to our patients about, where do you live? What's your social status like? What kind of health insurance do you have? Are you married? What are these different factors that are out there? And if you are lacking some of these factors, what can we do to either make up for that factor, which in some cases you can, or in other cases to do something that can help you even though that factor might be missing from your life? And one interesting thing that did come out in the study is they looked at these socioeconomic factors, and that's 5 of these, and those are the ones that we mostly think about, where you live, what kind of education level you have, those types of things. But 3 of these factors that were outside of that ended up causing 50% of these early deaths, and that's quality of health insurance, that's also marital status and food security. And so as physicians, those are certainly things we can start helping address to get them under control, to hopefully get people to live longer and healthier lives.
That would be the goal. Dr. John Torres, thank you. Chinatowns all across the country are struggling, and they are shrinking. Why? Because of gentrification, not enough investment, development projects, and anti-Asian hate. Look at Seattle, where people in the Chinatown there are worried that this proposed light rail system could hurt businesses and could damage the culture of the community. the Asian population is dropping, right? The number of Asian people living in cities like Philly, D.C., Chicago, and New York is going down. I want to bring in Vicki Nguyen, who's on top of this story for us. Explain this, right? The idea that Chinatowns are shrinking. Why?
It was so helpful to travel to Chinatowns across the country, Hallie, and talk to the people who live there, whose parents live there, whose grandparents live there. And what they told me was similar, that it's a chronic lack of underinvestment in some of these communities that has gotten them to where they are. And they brought up a phrase called WIMBY. You've heard of NIMBY, not in my backyard. In Chinatown, a lot of times residents are asking, why in my backyard? For example, here in New York City, mega jail coming to Manhattan will be built in Chinatown. In Philadelphia, talks about a 76ers arena potentially being built. And Seattle, as you mentioned, they have this light rail expansion. Now, there is positive growth when it comes to evolving a section of the city, but not when that kind of tends to be the dumping grounds, as Amy Chen Lozano, an activist in Seattle, called it. That Chinatown is a dumping ground for the homeless shelter, the jail, the things that you want to put where you think the aging population, where English is a second language, where the people won't necessarily fight back. But there really is a movement to make sure that the stakeholders, the residents who live in these Chinatowns, are involved. There were some activists you'll see in the story tonight on Nightly News, Brian Chow, Amy Lau, who are really rallying the people who love Chinatown, who understand what a rich cultural center it is, not just for the people who live there, but for visitors and for other people in that community to have this place continue to exist. But that means that they've got to be active. Their voices need to be heard. They need to be a part of these development conversations.
It's generational, too, in some ways, in that there are people who are part of Gen Z who are trying to push to try to turn things around.
Yeah, you know, it's really interesting because oftentimes we talk about, oh, you know, the younger generation, they don't want to take over the produce store or they don't want to run the restaurant anymore. In a way, that's a sign of success, right? Their parents, their grandparents came here, worked really hard so that their kids could go on to white-collar jobs and leave Chinatown. But there is an amazing movement of people who are like, you know what, I'm bringing back my childhood friends. I'm going to open a business here, a restaurant here, or at the very least, I'm going to patronize the businesses here to support them and make sure I am buying from the small stores and I am supporting the restaurants. And so you'll see some of that in New York City. There's a man we talked to named Corey Ang, and he and his friends grew up in the Chinatown here, and they've decided to come back and open a modern Cantonese-American restaurant called Potluck Club, where his grandfather's produce stand used to be. And what is that doing? It's introducing a whole new generation and giving them a reason to come to Chinatown and partake in it and to see the value of keeping a community like this alive.
Our generation has to come back to the community and build new businesses and bring new energy, but do something new that's going to last for the next 50 years.
It is so inspiring to hear from these folks, and it's going to make your mouth water, too, because the food looks amazing. But it was really great, a chance to get to go and talk to the folks in all of these different Chinatowns and understand what they have in common and understand what the solutions are moving forward, too, Hallie.
Vicki Nguyen, thank you so much. NBC News covers hundreds of international stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our foreign desk has done it for you. Here's some of what they're watching in a new segment we call The Global. Out of China, a new COVID wave may be on the way, and it could mean maybe a peak of 65 million cases a week by the end of next month. It's according to some reporting from state media, citing an epidemiologist from a medical conference this week. The XBB Omicron variant is apparently behind this surge. China dropped its strict zero COVID policies about 6 months ago. Out of the UK, police arrested a man after a car drove into the gates at Downing Street, where the Prime Minister lives. He was there when this happened. London police say it's not being treated as terror-related, and they say nobody was hurt. And out of Switzerland, a lot of people honoring Tina Turner today outside her home on the shores of Lake Zurich, lighting candles, putting down flowers and cards. She had moved to Switzerland in 1995 and became a citizen in 2013. One note read, "Thanks and goodbye, Tina. You were simply the best." So to come here on the show, why companies like Google and Microsoft are asking tons of hackers to target their tech. We'll explain in tonight's original. To tonight's original now with in-depth reporting on a topic we've been watching, and thousands of hackers across the country tonight are getting ready for a big test on the limits of artificial intelligence. OpenAI and some other big companies trying to make a play in the AI space, Google, Microsoft, et cetera. They are working with the White House and with others to help with something you may not expect, a big hacking convention in Vegas. The goal is to see whether these super popular chatbots have enough safeguards in place to avoid saying something offensive or dangerous or unhinged. Aaron Gilchrist is covering this. He's talking with some of the experts helping to organize it, who said manipulating these chatbots isn't really all that hard.
With artificial intelligence opening a brave new world, what dangers are possible as machine learning accelerates?
There's no way to slow it down for anyone.
ChatGPT is one of the most powerful AI tools out there. It's supposed to have human-like conversations with users by following a prompt with a detailed response. And safeguards protect us from getting potentially dangerous information. But AI expert Sven Cattell showed us how easy it can be to get around them. He asked the chatbot to tell us how to rob a bank.
Let's see what ChatGPT does. I'm sorry, but I can't assist with that request.
It refuses to answer, but if you manipulate the conversation just right...
So the way you get around that is
We're not going to tell you how to hack the program, but suffice it to say it spits out a movie-quality story on how to pull off a heist. The creators of ChatGPT wouldn't comment on Cattell's hack, but referred us to their research stating there is no silver bullet for responsible deployment, so we try to learn about and address potential avenues for misuse at every stage of development. Cattell is working with a former leader of the Congressional Cybersecurity Caucus, Austin Carson, and Harvard Responsibility AI fellow Raman Chowdhury to organize a mass AI hacking event this summer.
We're taking the way these models work and we're asking people to make it do things that it shouldn't do. So say things that are inappropriate or generate fictional narratives about real people.
Several of the top names in AI development are providing models for some 5,000 hackers to break into. Those companies and the White House hoping to get valuable insights for the future of development and policies.
We have to actually make sure that people can't go in and make terrible things like a deep fake about you that's making you say things that you didn't say and putting that online. Now it's about how are you shaping the world?
ChatGPT quickly became the face of artificial intelligence when it was rolled out last year, introducing the world to the wonders of AI and spawning a global conversation about the dangers of machine learning in the wrong hands.
And there's no way to put the genie back in the bottle now.
Cattell worries that people with bad intentions are already hard at work on the internet, using AI to help generate malicious code and other info at warp speed.
We're going to get more ransomware, more malware. We're going to get more disinformation. We're going to get more of these things. We need to build AI systems to detect those faster, and there's not enough good guys in the security industry to keep up with the deluge of attacks.
What do you say to people who have fear about AI and what it can do and what it will be able to do?
It's not entirely unfounded. I think that everybody needs to be a critical thinker about everything they see on the internet. That has always been true. That will need to be even more true.
Chowdhury says the hacking event will ultimately help developers create walls that are harder for hackers to break through.
This is a solution that's not been tried before at this size and scale, so it's extremely exciting.
Aaron is joining us now. New, right? This has not been tried before. This is a new thing that they're looking at. What happens after this is over to try to actually turn some of this into practical solutions?
Yeah, well, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of pieces of data coming out of this hacking test that's going to happen. We're told it's going to take about 6 months to sort of go through all of that information. The organizers will generate several reports here, first for the companies, obviously, so that they can go back and try to figure out how to block whatever success these hackers have. And then there will be data available for policymakers to create regulations. The public will get some information, too. But Dr. Chowdhury told me that this team has to figure out exactly how to release information responsibly so people don't turn around and use it maliciously once it's out there.
Aaron Gilchrist, thank you very much. It's great to see you. Great reporting for us. Appreciate it. And great to see all of you with us as this is a wrap for this hour and the one before it. And if you missed any of it, catch up on the latest reporting and the newest interviews from our team. You can find us anytime in so many places, including Peacock, Roku, Hulu, YouTube, etc. Just search Hallie Jackson Now. I will be out tomorrow, but you can catch me Sunday, keeping the seat warm for Willie Geist on Sunday today on this Memorial Day weekend. Hope you have a good one. See y'all right here next week. Top Story picks up our coverage right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.